Paul Samuelson. American economist. Paul Anthony Samuelson, May 15, 1915, December 13, 2009, was an American economist. The first American to win the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences, the Swedish Royal Academies stated, when awarding the prize in 1970, that he has done more than any other contemporary economist to raise the level of scientific analysis in economic theory. Economic historian Randall Parker has called him the father of modern economics, and the New York Times considered him to be the foremost academic economist of the 20th century. Samuelson was likely the most influential economist of the later 20th century. In 1996, when he was awarded the National Medal of Science, considered to be America's top science honor, President Bill Clinton commended Samuelson for his fundamental contributions to economic science for over 60 years. Samuelson considered mathematics to be the natural language for economists and contributed significantly to the mathematical foundations of economics with his book Foundations of Economic Analysis. He was author of the best-selling economics textbook of all time, Economics, an Introductory Analysis, first published in 1948. It was the second American textbook that attempted to explain the principles of Keynesian economics. It is now in its 19th edition, having sold nearly 4 million copies in 40 languages. James Peterber, former head of MIT's Department of Economics, noted that by his book, Samuelson leaves an immense legacy, as a researcher and a teacher, as one of the giants on whose shoulders every contemporary economist stands. He entered the University of Chicago at age 16, during the depths of the Great Depression, and received his Ph.D. in economics from Harvard. After graduating, he became an assistant professor of economics at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, when he was 25 years of age and a full professor at age 32. In 1966, he was named Institute Professor, MIT's highest faculty honor. He spent his career at MIT, where he was instrumental in turning its Department of Economics into a world-renowned institution by attracting other noted economists to join the faculty, including later winners of the Nobel Prize Robert Solow, Franco Modigliani, Robert C. Merton, Joseph Stiglitz, and Paul Krugman. He served as an advisor to Presidents John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson, and was a consultant to the United States Treasury, the Bureau of the Budget and the President's Council of Economic Advisors. Samuelson wrote a weekly column for Newsweek magazine along with Chicago school economist Milton Friedman, where they represented opposing sides. Samuelson, as a self-described cafeteria Keynesian, claimed taking the Keynesian perspective but only accepting what he felt was good in it. By contrast, Friedman represented the monetarist perspective. Together with Henry Wallich, their 1967 columns earned the magazine a Gerald Loeb Special Award in 1968. Biography. Samuelson was born in Gary, Indiana, on May 15, 1915, to Frank Samuelson, a pharmacist, and Ellen A. Lipton. His family, he later said, was made up of upwardly mobile Jewish immigrants from Poland who had prospered considerably in World War I, because Gary was a brand new steel town when my family went there. In 1923, Samuelson moved to Chicago where he graduated from Hyde Park High School, now Hyde Park Career Academy. He then studied at the University of Chicago and received his Bachelor of Arts degree there in 1935. He said he was born as an economist, at 8:00 am on January 2, 1932, in the University of Chicago classroom. The lecture mentioned as the cause was on the British economist Thomas Malthus, who most famously studied population growth and its effects. Samuelson felt there was a dissonance between neoclassical economics and the way the system seemed to behave. He said Henry Simons and Frank Knight were a big influence on him. He next completed his Master of Arts degree in 1936, and his Doctor of Philosophy in 1941 at Harvard University. He won the David A. Wells Prize in 1941 for writing the best doctoral dissertation at Harvard University in economics. for a thesis titled Foundations of Analytical Economics, which later turned into Foundations of Economic Analysis. As a graduate student at Harvard, Samuelson studied economics under Joseph Schumpeter, Wassily Leontief, Gottfried Haberler, and the American Keynes Alvin Hansen. Samuelson moved to MIT as an assistant professor in 1940 and remained there until his death. Samuelson's family included many well-known economists, including brother Robert Summers, sister-in-law Anita Summers, brother-in-law Kenny Tharrow and nephew Larry Summers. During his 7 decades as an economist, Samuelson's professional positions included Assistant Professor of Economics at MIT, 1940, Associate Professor, 1944. Member of the Radiation Laboratory 1944-45. Professor of International Economic Relations, part-time, at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy in 1945. Guggenheim Fellowship from 1948 to 1949, Professor of Economics at MIT beginning in 1947 and Institute Professor beginning in 1962. Vernon F. Taylor Visiting Distinguished Professor at Trinity University, Texas, in spring 1989. Death. Samuelson died after a brief illness on December 13, 2009, at the age of 94. His death was announced by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. James M. Patuba, an economics professor at MIT and the president of the National Bureau of Economic Research, commented that Samuelson leaves an immense legacy, as a researcher and a teacher, as one of the giants on whose shoulders every contemporary economist stands. Susan Hockfield, the president of MIT, said that Samuelson transformed everything he touched. The theoretical foundations of his field, the way economics was taught around the world, the ethos and stature of his department, the investment practices of MIT, and the lives of his colleagues and students. Fields of interest. As professor of economics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Samuelson worked in many fields, including consumer theory, where he pioneered the revealed preference approach, which is a method by which one can discern a consumer's utility function, by observing their behavior. Rather than postulate a utility function or a preference ordering, Samuelson imposed conditions directly on the choices made by individuals, their preferences as revealed by their choices. Welfare economics, in which he popularized the Lindahl-Bowen-Samuelson conditions, criteria for deciding whether an action will improve welfare, and demonstrated in 1950 the insufficiency of a national income index to reveal which of two social options was uniformly outside the others. Feasible, possibility function, collected scientific papers, v. 2, ch. 77, Fisher, 1987, p. 236. Capital theory, where he is known for 1958 consumption loans model and a variety of turnpike theorems and involved in Cambridge capital controversy. Finance theory, in which he is known for the efficient market hypothesis. Public finance theory, in which he is particularly known for his work on determining the optimal allocation of resources in the presence of both public goods and private goods. International economics, where he influenced the development of two important international trade models, the Balassa-Samuelson effect, and the Heckscher-Ohlin model, with the Stolper-Samuelson theorem. Macroeconomics, where he popularized the overlapping generations model as a way to analyze economic agents' behavior across multiple periods of time, collected scientific papers, v. 1, ch. 21, and contributed to formation of the neoclassical synthesis. Market economics, Samuelson believed unregulated markets have drawbacks. He stated, free markets do not stabilize themselves. Zero regulating is vastly suboptimal to rational regulating. Libertarianism is its own worst enemy. Samuelson strongly criticized Friedman and Friedrich von Hayek, arguing their opposition to state intervention tells us something about them rather than something about Genghis Khan or Franklin Roosevelt. It is paranoid to warn against inevitable slippery slopes, once individual commercial freedoms are in any way infringed upon. Impact. Samuelson is considered one of the founders of neo-Keynesian economics and a seminal figure in the development of neoclassical economics. In awarding him the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences, the committee stated, "More than any other contemporary economist, Samuelson has helped to raise the general analytical and methodological level in economic science. He has simply rewritten considerable parts of economic theory. He has also shown the fundamental unity of both the problems and analytical techniques in economics, partly by a systematic application of the methodology of maximization for a broad set of problems." This means that Samuelson's contributions range over a large number of different fields. He was also essential in creating the neoclassical synthesis, which ostensibly incorporated Keynesian and neoclassical principles and still dominates current mainstream economics. In 2003, Samuelson was one of the 10 Nobel Prize-winning economists signing The Economist's statement opposing the Bush tax cuts. Aphorisms and quotations. Stanislaw Ulam once challenged Samuelson to name one theory in all of the social sciences that is both true and non-trivial. Several years later, Samuelson responded with David Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage. That it is logically true need not be argued before a mathematician, that is not trivial is attested by the thousands of important and intelligent men who have never been able to grasp the doctrine for themselves or to believe it after it was explained to them. For many years, Samuelson wrote a column for Newsweek. One article included Samuelson's most quoted remark and a favorite economics joke, to prove that Wall Street is an early omen of movements still to come in GNP. Commentators quote economic studies alleging that market downturns predicted 4 out of the last 5 recessions. That is an understatement. Wall Street indexes predicted 9 out of the last 5 recessions. And its mistakes were beauties. In the early editions of his famous, best-selling economics textbook, Paul Samuelson joked that GDP falls when a man marries his maid. Publications. Foundations of Economic Analysis. Samuelson's book Foundations of Economic Analysis, 1946, is considered his magnum opus. It is derived from his doctoral dissertation, and was inspired by the classical thermodynamic methods. The book proposes to examine underlying analogies between central features in theoretical and applied economics and study how operationally meaningful theorems can be derived with a small number of analogous methods. p. 3. In order to derive a general theory of economic theories, Samuelson, 1983, p. 26. The book showed how these goals could be parsimoniously and fruitfully achieved, using the language of the mathematics applied to diverse subfields of economics. The book proposes 2 general hypotheses as sufficient for its purposes: maximizing behavior of agents, including consumers as to utility and business firms as to profit, and economic systems, including a market and an economy, in stable equilibrium. In the first tenet, his views presented the idea that all actors, whether firms or consumers, are striving to maximize something. They could be attempting to maximize profits, utility, or wealth, but it did not matter because their efforts to improve their well-being would provide a basic model for all actors in an economic system. His second tenet was focused on providing insight on the workings of equilibrium in an economy. Generally in a market, supply would equal demand. However, he urged that this might not be the case and that the important thing to look at was a system's natural resting point. Foundations presents the question of how an equilibrium would react when it is moved from its optimal point. Samuelson was also influential in providing explanations on how the changes in certain factors can affect an economic system. For example, he could explain the economic effect of changes in taxes or new technologies. In the course of analysis, comparative statics, the analysis of changes in equilibrium of the system that result from a parameter change of the system, is formalized and clearly stated. The chapter on welfare economics attempts to give a brief but fairly complete survey of the whole field of welfare economics. Samuelson, 1947, p. 252. It also exposits on and develops what became commonly called the Bergson-Samuelson social welfare function. It shows how to represent, in the maximization calculus, all real-valued economic measures of any belief system that is required to rank consistently different feasible social configurations in an ethical sense as better than, worse than, or indifferent to each other. p. 221. Economics. Samuelson is also author, and since 1985 co-author, of an influential principles textbook, Economics, first published in 1948, 19th ed. As of 2010, multiple reprints. The book sold more than 300,000 copies of each edition from 1961 through 1976 and was translated in the 41 languages. As of 2018, it has sold over 4 million copies. William Nordhaus joined as co-author on the 12th edition, 1985. Sometime before 1988, it had become the best-selling economics textbook of all time. Samuelson was once quoted as saying, "Let those who will write the nation's laws if I can write its textbooks." Written in the shadow of the Great Depression and the Second World War, it helped to popularize the insights of John Maynard Keynes. A main focus was how to avoid, or at least mitigate, the recurring slumps in economic activity. Samuelson wrote, "It is not too much to say that the widespread creation of dictatorships and the resulting World War II stemmed in no small measure from the world's failure to meet this basic economic problem, the Great Depression, adequately." This reflected the concern of Keynes himself with the economic causes of war and the importance of economic policy in promoting peace. In 1989, Samuelson commented on the economics of the Soviet Union and Marxism. Contrary to what many skeptics had earlier believed, the Soviet economy is proof that a socialist, command economy can function and even thrive. The revolutions of 1989 happened during the same year and the Soviet Union broke up 2 years later. Samuelson's book was the second one that attempted to introduce to a wider audience Keynesian economics, yet by far the most successful one. Canadian economist Laurie Tarshis, who had been a student attending Keynes's lectures at Harvard in the 1930s, published in 1947 an introductory textbook that incorporated his Tarshis's lecture notes, titled Elements of Economics. Other publications. There are 388 papers in Samuelson's collected scientific papers. Stanley Fisher, 1987, p. 234. Writes that taken together they are unique in their verve, breadth of economic and general knowledge, mastery of setting, and generosity of allusions to predecessors. Samuelson was co-editor, along with William A. Barnett, of Inside the Economist's Mind, Conversations with Eminent Economists, Blackwell Publishing, 2007, a collection of interviews with notable economists of the 20th century. Criticisms. Textbook influences in higher education. As a precursor to criticisms of Samuelson's economics textbook, Laurie Tarshis's textbook was attacked by trustees of, and donors to, American colleges and universities as preaching a socialist heresy. Piling on, William F. Buckley Jr., in his 1951 book, God and Man at Yale, devoted an entire chapter, attacking both Samuelson's and Tarshi's textbooks. For Samuelson's book, Buckley drew from the Educational Examiner and credited it as an excellent review of Samuelson's text. Note to Chapter 2. p. 234. For Tarshi's book, Buckley drew from Merwin K. Hart's organization to wit, I am also grateful to the National Economic Council for its telling analysis of the Tarshi's. Note to Chapter 2. p. 234. Buckley essentially characterized both as, in the words of Paul Davidson, communist-inspired. Buckley, for the rest of his life, defended the criticisms set forth in his book, Soviet Economic Growth. One criticism, of a concept that Samuelson added to his economics textbook, was the comparison of United States growth rates with those of the Soviet Union, which, according to the criticism, was inconsistent with historical GNP differences. The textbook's 1967 edition, 7th ed., extrapolates, projects, the possibility of Soviet-US real GNP parity between 1977 and 1995. Each subsequent edition extrapolates a date range further in the future until those graphs were dropped from the 1985 edition. 12th ed. Phillips curve. Samuelson, together with Robert Solow, helped develop and popularize the mathematics of the Phillips curve. The curve suggested that unemployment and inflation were inversely related. With the advent of stagflation in the 1970s, some economists including Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek attacked the economics based on the Phillips curve as questionable or mistaken. Memberships. Member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, National Academy of Sciences, Fellow of Royal Society of London, Fellow of the American Philosophical Society and the British Academy. President, 1965-68, of the International Economic Association. Member and past President, 1961, of the American Economic Association, Member of the Editorial Board and past President, 1951, of the Econometric Society, Fellow, Council Member and past Vice President of the Royal Economic Society. Member of Phi Beta Kappa. List of publications. Samuelson, Paul A. 1947, Enlarged ed. 1983. Foundations of Economic Analysis, Harvard University Press. Samuelson, Paul A. 1948, Economics, An Introductory Analysis, with William D. Nordhaus, since 1985, 2009, 19th ed., McGraw-Hill. Samuelson, Paul A. 1952, Economic Theory and Mathematics, An Appraisal, American Economic Review, 42-2, pages 56-66. Samuelson, Paul A. 1954. The Pure Theory of Public Expenditure. Review of Economics and Statistics. 36, 4, 387-89. Samuelson, Paul A. 1958, Linear Programming and Economic Analysis with Robert Dorfman and Robert M. Solow, McGraw-Hill. Chapter Preview Links. Samuelson, Paul A. 1960. Efficient Paths of Capital Accumulation in Terms of the Calculus of Variations. In Narrow, Kenneth J. Carlin, Samuel, Supps, Patrick, eds. Mathematical Models in the Social Sciences, 1959, Proceedings of the First Stanford Symposium. Stanford Mathematical Studies in the Social Sciences, 4, Stanford, California, Stanford University Press. Pages 77-88. Samuelson, Paul A. 1982. Questionnaires tableau économique as a theorist would formulate it today. In Meek, Ronald, author, Bradley, Ian C., Howard, Michael C., eds. Classical and Marxian Political Economy. Essays in honor of Ronald L. Meek. London, Macmillan. Pages 45-78. The Collected Scientific Papers of Paul A. Samuelson, MIT Press. Preview links for Volume 1-3 below. Contents links for Volume 4-7. Samuelson, Paul A. 1966, Volume 1 via Google Books, 1937 mid 1964. Samuelson, Paul A. 1966, Volume 2 via Google Books, 1937 mid 1964. Samuelson, Paul A. 1972, Volume 3 via Google Books, mid-1964 to 1970. Samuelson, Paul A. 1977, Volume 4 via Internet Archive, 1971-76. Samuelson, Paul A. 1986, Volume 5 via Google Books, 1977 to 1985. Description via Samuelson, Paul A. 2011, Volume 6, 1986 to 2009. Description via Wayback Machine. Samuelson, Paul A. 2011, Volume 7, 1986–2009. Paul A. Samuelson Papers, 1933–2010, Rubenstein Library, Duke University. Samuelson, Paul A. 2007, Inside the Economist's Mind, Conversations with Eminent Economists with William A. Barnett, Blackwell Publishing. Samuelson, Paul A. 2002, Paul Samuelson and the Foundations of Modern Economics, Transaction Publishers.